When Dave and I started this podcast, I asked him about how he came to be interested in computer science. He said it was through magazines.
Remember when the bug hit me? My dad had taken me to watch a cricket match in Sefton Park, and I was not bothered with cricket at all. I was just reading a magazine called Your Computer, and it just got me attention.
So he taught himself to program, and then something started happening in his home city.
Holding Liverpool quite dramatically because people here started to produce games on them. So you had like companies called Bug Bite or Imagine starting up in Liverpool and in Manchester, where young people like me basically saw a third option: not become a footballer, not become a musician, to become a programmer, games programmer. And that was a viable opportunity there to do something new.
All this got me wondering if I could find any of the people who were around in the 80s. And I found Eugene Evans.
Oh boy.
Welcome to Married to the Machine with Professor David Reed, Stephanie Power, and the National Video Game Museum. Bonus episode, Electric Dreams, in conversation with Eugene Evans.
He lives in Seattle these days, but he agreed to talk to us.
My name is Eugene Evans, and I've spent over 40 years in the video games business, more years than I often prefer to admit to.
Eugene says he can slice his working life into 3 parts: working for startups in the UK and US, working for bigger companies,
Viacom, EA, Hasbro, where I led digital strategy and gaming, and then ended up more broadly responsible for Hasbro's entire portfolio, which is everything from Monopoly to Transformers to G.I. Joe to Hungry Hungry Hippo to Cluedo, you name it.
and the third slice, advising and consulting with games companies. Can I take you back to, imagine Dave is sitting at Sefton Park Cricket Club, not interested in the cricket. How old were you then, Dave, roughly?
16, 17.
What year was that?
Oh, it was early 80s, really. Thinking back then to those times, there wasn't much in Liverpool. I think this is what we said in our podcast. There was only 2 options for a young boy back then, if you come from a working class background, and that was either to play football or join a band. And all of a sudden, this third option came along. That was to be a programmer, in particular a games programmer. So it opened up new possibilities.
Yeah.
What was that story for you, Eugene? It's like tell us about which bit of Liverpool you're from and all of that, where you went to school.
Oh boy. I was born in the city, but my parents were part of that move in the mid-60s to get everybody out of some of the rougher, older housing out to the developing suburbs.
In Liverpool, you can walk for miles across the city through an unbroken chain of parks and gardens and never know the constrictions of metropolis.
So I was born in the city, and right before I turned 2, we moved out to a place called Kentrell Farm, for the locals, Kenny Farm. And what is now in a masterful piece of marketing called Stockbridge Village. My mom still lives there, in the house I grew up in. But my journey really began with a trip to the US. I want to say it would have been 78, because I'm pretty sure I was about 11. We visited the US, and I already had kind of a fascination with games. I killed far too much time playing in arcades. My grandparents lived in North Wales, and we would go and visit and go to the arcades at the beach in Prestatyn and Rhyl.
Oh, yeah. I used to go there. Gronant, the Point of Ayr, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh, so that's where my grandmother was. My grandmother lived on Point of Ayr.
Oh, did she? One of the best video arcade games that I was obsessed with, it was... It wasn't Missile Command, it was a vector-based one that was based on Star Wars at the time. I used to play it obsessively.
That's exactly right. we would go to the arcade there, and if we were really lucky, we could get down to the bigger arcades in Prestatyn and Frith, and so I grew up holidaying there. So I already had this fascination with arcade machines, and also just was trying to figure out electronics myself. Didn't have much money to spend. So we visit the US, and I walk into a Radio Shack store. They were called Radio Shack in the US at the time. In the UK, they were called Tandy. And in there was the recently launched TRS-80 computer.
Classic.
Let your children discover tomorrow's technology today. The TRS-80, the biggest name in little computers. Only at Radio Shack, a Tandy company.
So here I was, whatever I was, 11, 12, walking into this store, and it was like, oh my gosh, it's a computer I can actually put my hands on.
Remember, this is the late 1970s. There's no internet to feed a young boy's obsessions. Eugene spends time in Liverpool's Central Library, finding out everything he can about computers and looking for somewhere in the city that's like Radio Shack, or Tandy as it was called in the UK.
And I found the nearest, it might have been the only Tandy store at the time, was in the Old Swan.
Yeah.
Which was convenient because that's a bus ride away from me. We would hang out on the Saturday and start writing code on this thing and just trying to figure out what it was all about, just in basic.
The store manager soon gets fed up with him, so he goes looking for other places in the city centre.
And then I discovered this store, Microdigital, which was on Brunswick Street in the heart of the city. And it was an absolute revelation, because it was just like the rest from Monday till Friday, where everybody put a suit and tie on and was trying to convince people to buy what were at the time these very expensive computers. But on a Saturday, it was different. And on a Saturday, it was more like a computer club.
At that time, I guess for both of you at school, there were no computer classes.
They were very expensive. A TRS-80 at the time was very expensive. I remember the Texas Instrument one as well. That was an expensive computer. And in my school, they couldn't afford a computer. Most schools had Commodore PETs to play around with.
That's right. We didn't have anything. And in fact, it was 2 or 3 years after I discovered Microdigital and started to get involved there, that the Parent-Teacher Association, or whatever it was called at the time, drummed up some money from somewhere and bought a Commodore PET, maybe two. And one of the math teachers, because it was always the math teachers,
Crack on with your algebra. All right.
Who started to say, well, we'll offer a computer science course. It might have been an O-level course. And I took it, and I think I flunked it.
Wouldn't be computer science, actually. It'd just be straight IT, which is back then was pretty boring. It wasn't the same sort of thing, really.
Yeah, it was more. That was more courses in how to use a computer in business than actually how to learn to code a computer.
Eugene is hanging out at Microdigital, run by a guy called Bruce Everis. Eugene says he had a real vision.
He had visited the US, seen a couple of computer stores in what we now understand to be Silicon Valley, and he saw two things. He saw a computer store selling hardware to hobbyists, and he saw a bookstore selling some of the very first published books to teach people, hobbyists principally, how to code and how to use computers. What we now understand, perhaps only in hindsight, was that we're pretty sure it was the first computer store in England.
That reminds me of when I first moved to Liverpool and people kept talking about the Cunard Yanks bringing music from America to Liverpool, which played a big role in the Beatles as just one band. It's kind of like a computer version.
Yeah. Well,
someone goes to America and brings books back.
Yeah.
And there's no other way of getting them almost.
I used to get Dr. Dobbs, a monthly magazine that was very, very good from America. Well, it wasn't from America, but somebody used to sell it in this country and import it. It was really good magazine.
For Eugene and Dave, the micro-digital store is practically the centre of the universe.
I asked them for a job. Would they pay me to work there on a Saturday? And the first response is, well, you're not even 13.
And then his chance comes once he's old enough to have a job.
And I turned 13, and then one day there was a guy, and I was sitting at an Apple II, and a guy started asking me questions and talking about the computer, and I answered his questions. And the next thing I know, he says to me, okay, I'll take one. and I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I want to buy the computer. And I went to the counter, and the manager, who at that point I knew quite well, I said, I think I just sold him a computer. And he bought an Apple II and a couple of floppy drives and a monitor. At the time, this was maybe a £1,200, £1,400 purchase.
Yeah, which back then was a lot of money.
It may very well have been the only one they sold that day.
You could buy a car for that in those days, couldn't you, really?
Yeah. The next thing you know, they were like, well, why don't you start working here? So I started working every Saturday that I could. My dad was a bus driver in Liverpool. He used to drive the 26 bus, the circular route. One of the ways I was able to do this and get down there was I would go with him to work on a Saturday. And I just did whatever needed to be done. Cleaning, dusting.
Despite the dusting, the whole operation is very unpolished. Games are brought in from the US and packaged up in Ziploc sandwich bags, complete with handwritten descriptions of the game inside. Bruce Everest sells the micro-digital concept to another electronics chain, Lasky's. It looks like those Saturday afternoons are over. But then there's a rebirth thanks to a man called Tim Best and a couple of engineers from the local commercial radio station. The Liverpool Computer Centre is born, right next to one of the Mersey tunnels.
It was a bit of a rough road. It's funny to think about this. When we first opened the store, the building had been pretty derelict and they were renovating the whole building. And we had no toilet facilities. And the nearest toilet that was available, and one of the neighbors on the row was happy to let us go use their toilet. But it was the porn theater, the strip club cum porn cinema that was on the end of that row. There were some very funny moments where sometimes the strippers would stop at the store and say hello in the morning. I was still 14 or 15, so that was an eye-opener. Yeah, we tried to recreate that feeling, because it had been taken away. There was a company in Liverpool called Bug Bite. Again, like Microdigital, it's fairly clear now that they may have been the first game publisher in the UK.
Yeah.
Like, again, I've struggled to identify, and I've talked to other people in the industry. We're pretty sure they were the first. And it was started by two Tonys, Tony Milner and Tony Baden, who were, I think, Oxford chemistry graduates, who had discovered computers and were writing games for the ZX80, the 81, some of those very, very first home computers, the VIC-20, and were publishing them and sending them out mail order. And so here I was. I had started to write some code, had written a lot of demos. Liverpool Computer Centre had a side business where they were making accessory cards for the Apple II.
Yeah.
I'd bought myself an Apple II and was writing code. So I spent a summer writing demo code for these boards they had. They made a board that talked. It had one of the very first chips on it that could talk, and so I wrote a bunch of demo stuff that showed these boards off. And the guys at BugBite needed to buy some extra hardware, an Apple II, and I had to deliver it. And I go over there and I'm like, wait a minute, you're making computer games? Yeah. And you're publishing them? Yeah. And you're making money from this? Yeah. And my mind was just blown.
Eugene is about to make some serious money.
The whole of the industry had pivoted at that point. There was a growing sense of that it was a sort of like a grassroots movement, really, where people were starting to become interested in the entertainment value of computers, not just the business value. Quite radical at the time, that sort of feeling.
Yeah, Dave Lawson, self-taught programmer. I mean, he was probably, 21, 22. Had done a stint in, I think, the Merchant Navy. And had taught himself to code. And somehow it turned up there. To your point, he had written a copy of Pac-Man for the VIC-20.
This is the current craze game, Pac-Man.
I like the little man. He's really neat. He eats up all the other things, you know.
I've got that game, by the way. It's called Vic-Man, isn't it?
Yeah, and he wrote that. And it did really, really well. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies. I was just enamored by this. They said to me, what have you been doing? And I showed them what I've been doing. And I coded it in all these graphic demos and demos that I'd done. I'd written it all in 6502, which was the machine code of the Apple II. And the VIC-20 had the same chip in it. And they said, well, if we give you a VIC-20, do you want to write a game? And I said, yeah. They said, we'll pay you for it. That was kind of it. That completely killed the 6 months I was supposed to be studying for my O-level. So I was 15. I wrote this game called Vic Panic. I turned 16 in May of that year. So what is that? 82. And they said, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to stay at school? And I said, well, that's what everybody wants me to do. And they said, well, we'll give you a job. And I said, okay. And somewhat to the chagrin of my teachers, I left and I joined BugBite.
This bonus episode has been brought to you by
Cyberdyne Systems.
No, not really. This episode has been made in partnership with the National Video Game Museum in Sheffield, the only museum dedicated to video games in the UK. It houses 300 exhibits and 80 playable games, spanning from the 1970s to the present day. You'll love it so much, you'll be saying to yourself when you leave, I'll be back. No, I don't do accents.
I was having a little trawl around. What I hadn't really realised when I first got in touch with you. But was it with BugBite or Imagine that you were then kind of celebrated as this amazing bedroom coder, and you became like the poster boy for this new thing? But which is interesting because it was a thing coming out of Liverpool where people weren't really expecting anything to come from Liverpool.
I joined BugBite. We shipped my game. It did okay. I started on another one. I started to get involved with looking at games that we were being sent. Because people were discovering, there's a company here that if I send them a game, they might actually pay me for it. Maybe a couple of £100, maybe £1,000, and they'll publish this thing.
So this is people who are at home, creating games, sending them into BugBite to say, is this one any good for you? And then you might say, yeah, here's a couple of £100 for your work.
Yeah, we would get tapes in the mail every week.
Wow.
And so I started to take the job of like loading it up, looking at it, and 90% of it was not great. But occasionally you would look at something and go, oh my gosh, this is amazing, right?
There are two other guys in Liverpool who want to build something bigger. Dave Lawson, the former Navy guy turned programmer, and Mark Butler, who's travelling around the country selling games to stores like WH Smith.
So you had Dave, who was this brilliant self-taught programmer, and Mark, who was the sales guy and knew where all the stores were, and they basically said, well, why don't we go do this ourselves? They were both in their early 20s. By this point, I was 17 or so. And they said to me, well, we're going to set this up. Why don't you come with us? At the time in Liverpool, there were programs that, as they were trying to figure out the employment problem in Liverpool, which at the time was pretty horrendous.
It's awful. It was awful at the time.
I think the unemployment rate in Liverpool, I think, was running at something like 25%.
In some areas, it was 50%.
When I left school and got a job immediately, walked into a job, it was incredibly uncommon. The fact that it was a job making computer games made it even more bizarre. The city's roots were obviously in shipping and manufacturing.
It was a type of youth movement as well, because if you asked anybody at the time, are you into computers or doing computer games, they wouldn't really, if you were over 25, 30, they wouldn't know what you were talking about really very often.
No, not at all. So Mark and Dave were able to get, I want to say it was like a £20,000 or £25,000 grant from the city. There were these incentive programs where I guess if you could make a case for, hey, we're going to start a business, you could get money. And somehow they did. Dave went off and used this money to write a game on both the Spectrum and the VIC-20. And that game was Arcadia, which was a copy of an Apple II game that we all liked.
Yeah.
A copy is unfair, but it was definitely inspired by this other game. And I forget what the game was now. This was a shooter, so you'd have these waves of spaceships flying down at you. And he wrote this, and it was quite brilliant. The fact that he wrote it for the two different machines was also, maybe accidentally brilliant. Because it meant that when it came to advertise, the idea of writing the same game on more than one computer was unheard of at the time.
Yeah.
And obviously they were very, very different machines, but he captured the spirit of that game in the one.
Different fundamental processors, weren't they? One was a Z80, one was a 6502.
Exactly. And very different graphic capabilities, very different memory. He built the game on both. It was fun on both. It sold really well. And they had said, okay, once we're in an office and we're set up, you join us. So I was arguably the first employee, depending upon if you count Mark and Dave's wives, who both got involved with helping.
Around this time, there's a culture of copying other games or being inspired by them. So why would these young businessmen in Liverpool be any different?
Well, a funny thing happened when we were at Bug Bite. Dave had written this game, Vicman, which was a copy of Pac-Man. One day we get a letter in the mail, and it's a very official-looking letter from Atari saying, we've identified that you have created this copy of Pac-Man. This is a cease and desist letter.
Wow.
You need to tell us that you've stopped marketing it, stopped selling it, and destroyed every copy of the game that you currently have in your possession.
Wow.
And we took this very seriously, obviously, because it was a letter from Atari.
Yeah.
And we had no choice. And so we stopped. It was a period when Atari had just been bought by Warner, and they made the decision, okay, we're going to stop people from making clones, copies of our games. I think they had the rights to Pac-Man. It wasn't actually an Atari game, but they had the rights to it. And so we stopped. So what that meant was when we went to Imagine, and this was part of why I think it was Mark who came up with the name, which is obviously inspired by the John Lennon track. We said, you know what, we're going to make original games.
So you'd gone to Imagine. How old were you when you went to Imagine, Eugene?
17. I don't think I'd turned 18 yet.
How did this thing come about that meant that there was a kind of national story about this company, Imagine, and the fact that the games were being created by what they were calling bedroom programmers at the time? Can you remember about it? Because it's you in a Lotus. So it was all about, look at this guy. He's made all this. Look at, he's making all this money. So can you tell us a bit about that?
This was all about Bruce.
Bruce Everest, the man behind Microdigital, is back on the scene. He can tell Imagine could have a real future if it just sorts out its marketing.
I think he really recognized that Dave and Mark were quite brilliant in their own way. And so he leaned into helping us. I can't remember his official role. He might have just been consulting, but he came along one day and had said, you know, what we really need to do is to develop a national profile. You know, we were running ads, running full color ads, and they were very different. The Imagine ads really stand out. Real ads by professional artists, and there wasn't very many other people who were doing it at the time. But Bruce had bigger ideas. He picked up on this vibe. There were these kids that were coding. Yeah, it's like the 60s when these bands were being formed by a bunch of kids that were just making music. You know, nobody had told them how, and nobody had told them how to do it, and they were being successful. You know, they looked at me and said, okay, so this is what we're thinking.
Yeah.
We're going to put out this story about what you're doing and the fact that you're this 17-year-old. I might have been 16 when we did it. I can't remember. Bruce just said, yeah, you're it, because our version of this story is you. And I said, okay. And I didn't really think anything of it. So Bruce had a cousin, I think, who was in PR, and so she came in and she wrote a press release and she put the press release out there. And all I remember is walking in on a Monday morning and the phones were ringing off the hook. And every newspaper in the country was calling us up saying, hey, we want to interview this kid. Because the story was, here was this 16-year-old kid out of Liverpool who was, you know, being well compensated, writing games. So there was every aspect of this story was a story.
Yeah.
You know, here was, what do you mean there's a kid writing games?
In his bedroom.
Yeah.
Well, I was at the office at the time, but that was the culture we were capturing. You know, at a time when unemployment was so bad, especially in the city, in some way it was just kind of something of a feel-good, positive story.
Yeah.
You know, and it very quickly got very weird because it just absolutely blew up. You know, the next thing you know, I go home that night. My mom and dad are like, yeah, a journalist turned up and interviewed us today. But we hadn't told them. We didn't think, hey, we should probably tell my parents this. And they had just probably very innocently gone, oh, yes, this very nice journalist turned up and he was asking us questions about you. And the next thing you know, one of the articles that appeared in the newspaper had a picture of my mum and dad in it. You know, and I don't think they realized. And in the following week, just about every national newspaper, and there were a lot more of them then, and local, you know, I think that brought national attention to the idea, oh, I can make money doing this. There was a lot about that time that I don't feel great about because we really ran with the story in ways that we lost sight of what we should have been focusing on. But the one thing I do feel very, very good about to this day is the number of people I've met who said, yeah, I saw that and I was writing games and I suddenly realized, oh, there is a job.
Yeah.
And I was able to show it to my parents and go, look, he's done it.
Yeah.
And in a way, at that time, maybe there was a bit of spin around it all, but actually at that time, given the circumstances, given what was happening in Liverpool, maybe it's just like, well, so what?
It was definitely a positive thing. It was definitely the youth at the time saw it as an opportunity that they could take that wasn't there before.
I have friends still who have told me, that's how I got started. I saw the coverage that you guys got.
Within a year, Imagine is making between 8 and 10 million pounds.
I have no idea how much my games contributed, but it was not a lot. But the press, it just exploded. It reached its peak ridiculousness when I was still living at home at the time, and I get home one day and there's a letter in the mail, and my mum and dad look at me and they go, "This is a letter from Downing Street." And I said, "What?" And it had the seal of 10 Downing Street on the back of it. And I opened the letter, and it was an invitation to go to 10 Downing Street for this event.
Wow!
And it was kind of wild.
This company would have been exactly the thing that Margaret Thatcher would have thought was fantastic. People just sorting themselves out, being innovative, entrepreneurial, making money. I mean, it's like coming from her favourite city.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have to embrace new technology. We have to try to give help, and we are, to small businesses to start up and to expand.
We didn't really understand that at the time. And I went, and we didn't make a big deal out of that. That was a little weird, because it coincidentally was the day that she announced she was running for a second term. It was me and 60 or 100 people, industry people, celebrities. Who was the Liverpool comedian? Tarbuck?
Jimmy
Tarbuck.
Yeah.
There were him and another comedian at the time were there, and I picked up the nerve to
Kenny Everett, perhaps.
Kenny Everett?
I would have remembered him. It was not a Liverpool guy, but Tarbuck was. And I went and introduced myself to him, and it was just like, I'm from Liverpool. And we talked for about 5 minutes, and the whole thing was kind of absurdly odd.
Will you please tell me about the Lotus? Were you too young? You got a Lotus, but were you too young to drive it?
No. Somebody spun that story. It was a nice angle, probably Bruce. But I didn't get it until I was 18. This success that we were enjoying, you give a couple of early 20-year-olds that level of success, and the next thing you know, they want nice cars. I turned 18, and they were like, "We want to get you a company car." And they gave me this Lotus Esprit to drive around. It was a bright red Lotus Esprit S3. And, again, the press loved it. It made for great footage, because here was this parking space at Exchange Street East with 4 or 5 of these fancy sports cars. So there was this whole kind of celebrity rock star. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but in its own little bubble. And Liverpool was still such a tough place, and the city council was still the militant left wing poking at Thatcher, and they got upset with us at one point. I think Bruce had the crazy idea to buy, the tower at St. John's shopping centre,
the Beacon,
which was empty forever. It was a restaurant, and then it sat empty until Radio City took it over. Well, they tried to buy it, and Bruce had the idea of moving into it as our office. And the Liverpool City Council basically were like, we're not having that. This upstart company taking over this landmark building. The fact that it was virtually derelict and empty didn't seem to matter to them. This bunch of young capitalists taking this thing over was perhaps...
And looking down on the rest of the city as well.
The
symbolism of it.
So that didn't go very far. But so that's how I ended up for a little while with a Lotus Esprit.
Imagine now has over 100 employees, including kids who are taken on to package up the games. The company is turning over around £10 million in revenue, and then they come upon a problem.
David had the foresight to see that product piracy was becoming a huge problem. So the downside of these games being distributed on tape is that all it is a recording of the data. But what that meant was you could connect two tape recorders together, hit play on one, hit record on the other, and make a copy of the tape for nothing, for the cost of a blank tape. Everybody did it, and there was no real way to stop it. So piracy was becoming a big thing, and we were running ads, basically saying piracy is bad, don't do it. But you're not going to tell a bunch of kids who don't have any money to spend. So you can imagine that despite the fact that we were selling hundreds of thousands of games, potentially millions of them were being copied.
So the company works on the design of a piece of hardware, taking inspiration from Atari, something that couldn't be so easily copied: a cartridge.
But the idea of doing this to the Spectrum was unheard of. The idea of shipping a game that the game was already burned onto a ROM on the cartridge, so that when you plugged it in, you still had a tape and you loaded the game off the tape, but then the game would use graphics off of this cartridge. And what it would mean is that we could make games that had much richer graphics and audio. So he prototyped this, and we started to build two games, one for the Commodore 64, which I was working on, called Cyclops, and the other for the Spectrum called Bandersnatch. Bruce nicknamed them the Mega Games. We started to really tease and promote these with quite a innovative marketing plan, where Bruce basically said, we're going to build early interest in this and build it up to a real hype. And we're going to tease these games, and that's what we did.
They have another idea too. Who remembers those Marshall Cavendish magazines?
Like a magazine that you buy that has a thing on the cover. Here's a book that's all about the history of the Napoleonic Wars, and every issue is going to have a part of a ship on it. And if you buy all 120 issues, you'll eventually be able to make
I remember the adverts.
Or whatever. Right. So they had the idea of doing a computer magazine. But what would be unique was that every issue would have a tape on the cover with a game on it. And one side of the tape would be for VIC-20 and the other side would be for Spectrum. Or by then, I think, maybe Commodore 64. And it was quite a brilliant idea, another way of doing distribution. They entered into an agreement with Imagine where we basically said, we'll provide the games. At the time, there was like 3 or 4 people writing games at the company, and they wanted a game a month.
Wow.
We went on this hiring spree. It was too early. There weren't the level of programmers, and anybody who was actually any good was like, I don't want to go work for these guys in Liverpool. I'm just going to keep building my own. And so we tried courting some of the better known programmers, but they were already off doing their own thing. It got to the point where if you had a warm pulse and you could demonstrate that you had figured out how to write a game, we would hire you. And we hired some quite brilliant people. So we went from 4 people writing the games to maybe 20, with no idea that this actually required a different level of discipline and planning. And you can imagine it didn't end very well.
They may be smiling now, but they're about to encounter Bandersnatch, coming soon from Imagine.
Imagine hires artists who design game covers and musicians who start to write music.
We hired artists. We hired a guy from one of the Liverpool art schools, and the next thing you know, he'd brought a whole bunch of his buddies in. to be artists, and then we hired some musicians, and they started to write music for the games. It was like, and this was unheard of.
It's big business. It was really
Yeah.
I think that was the tipping point when games all of a sudden became really big business at that point, almost film level.
Yeah, Ocean Software out of Manchester. It's one of those things. It was the first time I came to realize that success begets success. And by that I meant because we were successful, we could afford to invest more into games than other people could. Spoiler alert, it ended badly.
Success didn't actually beget success. Perhaps the company had taken on too much. A game a month for Marshall Cavendish and Bandersnatch, despite all the hype, never gets released. If you've heard of it, that's probably because of Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror. In 1984, a BBC TV series called Commercial Breaks is filming at Imagine Studios. The story is supposed to be about the battle for the video game Christmas number 1. Instead, the cameras capture Imagine being shut down.
As you can see, it's fairly empty. I think a lot of people are going to the pub quite early these days. But they've had the video cassette recorder playing this morning. They've all been watching An American Werewolf in London. And you see they've been making flags and decorating the place generally instead of doing work. Because why bother? They all know that, there's no point.
Bruce Everest tells the documentary makers that they can't make anything because they've got no suppliers. They've got a week to raise $500,000. That afternoon, Bruce Everest resigns, and when staff come back from their lunch break, they meet the bailiffs.
You'll let go, please, Michael.
Can you tell us what's happening?
You'll get your foot off the door, please. Thank you.
Are you still in touch with Bruce Everest? I mean, what happened with him?
No, I haven't. Bruce, I hope he's doing well. I haven't heard from him for a while. After Imagine blew up, Bruce went and started working with this company, Codemasters, which had been started by two brilliant young men, David and Richard Darling, and their father. He kind of did the same thing with them. They were two really successful young coders that had started their company. They drove flashy cards, and he basically did a bit of a wash, rinse, repeat on, I'm going to do for you what I did for Imagine.
Yeah.
And it didn't quite hit in the same way, despite the fact that in many ways their story was more legitimate. Like they were actually pulling it off and being hugely successful. But it didn't hit in quite the same way. It's like any story. The first time you hear it, it's kind of crazy and wild. The second time, you're like, yeah, I've heard the story before.
You have been listening to Married to the Machine with Professor David Reed and Stephanie Power. This episode has been supported by the National Video Game Museum. Music, mixing and sound design by Matt Power.